702.
Let's walk the talk on 92.7
and 106 FM.
On to this conversation now. The Western Cape High Court reserved judgment this week. Lobby group My Vote Counts is challenging the financial threshold of the political party funding judgment this week. Lobby group My Vote Counts is challenging the financial threshold of the Political Party Funding Act, the act which was signed into law earlier this year. So a reversal of previously set donation threshold and requirements for parties to declare their external income. These included a 15 million rand a year limit for a single donor and 100,000 rand declaration threshold. Remember, once in a while, I think in a quarter, you would see the IEC publishing how much the different political parties received. So when President Ramaphosa signed into law I think it's called the hold on, I'll tell you now, the Electoral Matters Amendment Act in May, to amend the Party Funding Act to allow independent candidates to run for positions in the National Assembly and provincial legislatures. That itself ultimately, supposedly, effectively removed the limits for accepting and declaring donations, which were previously prescribed, as I said, by the Act. We are having now a conversation with Joel Brachman, a senior researcher at My Vote Counts. Joel joins me on the line to speak about this particular matter and why My Vote Counts went back to court this week saying we need to rectify this very issue. Joel, good morning. Thank you so much for your time. Welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So the president's signature, that amendment earlier this year, has effectively put us in a really strange place where political parties aren't as transparent. So in the lead up to the elections, after the 7th of May, we have very little knowledge of who was donating to what political party and how much.
Well, exactly. So when this law was making its way through Parliament, we warned Parliament and we warned the President that signing the Electoral Matters Amendment Act would amend our political party funding laws in a way that would remove these two key limits that you mentioned. That's the 100,000 rand disclosure threshold and the 15 million rand annual cap. And we went to court in May after it was signed into law, because our reading of the law is that we have a lacuna, we have a gap in the law, where for the past 3 months or more, political parties, there's been no legal obligation for them to disclose these amounts, and there's been no limit on the amount that they could take. So that's why we went to court on an urgent basis to close this gap.
That free for all that you talk about. Why is it important to return to that previous status quo, that limitation that we had? Mind you, let me first start there. I'll ask about the political party's reaction to that limitation. First, let's speak about why it's important to go back to the status quo.
Sure. So before 2021, we had no party funding legislation, right? Political parties could and did take money from any sources, and there was no obligation for them to make it public. We didn't know who was funding our politics, and we know the environment that created, right, with the Bosasas, the Guptas. It was all part of that landscape. So when the Political Party Funding Act came into law, it was to deepen transparency, accountability, to understand who is funding our politics, what interests are potentially being pursued. And when these limits were removed, we've now entered this period of lawlessness. So it's essential that we reinstate these limits.
Part of what the political parties had seemingly been in agreement about was the limits existed. You had a 15 million threshold for a 15 million limitation from a single donor per year. You had that 100,000 rand per donor once the minimum threshold, the minimum requirement rather, not the threshold. And part of the issue that political parties had was that it felt like it was too little. Already, they were uncomfortable with the rules of engagement, as it were. Are you not worried about, as we attempt to move towards what we had before, where there are limitations, where there's some level of transparency, that you will find political parties who, no doubt, are probably enjoying this period, this gap at the moment, will fight back?
So, it's extremely hypercritical, because it was the same political parties and many times the same individuals, who voted this law into operation and who supported it. And political parties on publicly often stress the need for transparency and accountability. But we know since the law came into being the past few years, there's been enormous pushback, spearheaded by the ANC, and there have been attempts and efforts to water down the act, right? So we are going to court later in the year on a separate matter where we are challenging the constitutionality of certain aspects of the act. And we think the limits, the 15 million rand should be less. We think the 100,000 rand exposure threshold should be less. We can't go back to a secrecy in political party funding.
Let's speak about the importance of transparency in a democracy, because I think sometimes that's also lost on people, Joel, that people don't recognize what is important to fight for every aspect, every avenue of our democracy to be transparent and for people to understand what's happening.
So, I mean, one of the most important things about knowing who funds our politics, right, is it allows you to participate politically from a more informed position. It's a crucial part of the voting calculus. You need to know where the money's coming from and what interests are potentially being pursued, and if that party has been bought or if it's sold out. So there are, our courts have established that we have this right. It's constitutional court judgment led to the Act. It led to the amending of our Promotion of Access to Information Act, our information transparency laws, and it is essential that we keep on deepening transparency, that the more we know, the more empowered we are.
All right. I want to invite callers to also engage with you, Joel, if they've got questions about this particular issue, the amendment, the Political Party Funding Act, and the amendments that you seek to have reinstated. And I think it'll be interesting to see that you're saying that they must lower that 15 million rand cutoff, and then they must also be more transparent with a lot more than just 100,000 rand at an even lesser amount. The number to dial in is 011-883-0702. You can send voice notes or WhatsApps to 072-702-1702. I see somebody saying it's the lacuna in the law for me. It's the language. Latin. People love the Latin. With regards to the political parties or in the back and forth that you speak of, where you said that there is a pushback with the ANC at the heart of it, have there been attempts to speak as an organization, a lobby group like My Vote Counts? Have there been attempts to go to the table with the ANC, to the table with the different political parties about why is it important to move in a particular manner?
Sorry, why it's important to?
Why it is important in order to reinstate this, why it's important to be transparent around donors. I don't know if there have been any bilaterals with any of the parties, because you spoke about the pushback and you said the ANC is at the heart of this. Have there been conversations with the ANC to help understand what I think, because the ANC has been at the helm, helped create this constitution? My understanding would be that the ANC understands exactly why it's important. But would you have had conversations? Have you had conversations?
So it's, our engagements have more been participation processes, over the past few years, and there have been many of those. So that's the way we mainly engage with parties. But I mean, we make our positions very clearly known, and it's not some magical thinking or difficult reason to understand why this is important, right? We have the law, we have the Political Party Funding Act, and all we're trying to do now is literally take us back to where we were 3 months ago. We do have greater concerns around the act that we will challenge later, but this is literally just to close this gap.
All right, Joel, your line is a little bit patchy. I'm going to try to ask one more question. If it continues, I'll ask for them to fix the line, and then we'll try to get you back up. But let me give it a go. I think I can hear you properly. President Cyril Ramaphosa has brought the timing of when he signed that amendment. Was it a questionable move for you? Were you concerned? Was it the president putting the ANC's needs ahead of the country?
So there was a legal necessity to sign the Electoral Matters Amendment Act into law.
I'm going to cut you there quickly, Joel. The line is still patchy. I'm going to put you back, ask them to fix the line, and then you can come back and respond to that. Let's take a quick break while they do that.
Walking the talk.
This is 702.
702.
It's 11:49. You're listening to the Clement Manyathela Show. My name is Tshidi. Standing in for Clement, we are chatting to My Vote Counts. So speaking about transparency, they were in court this week, again, fighting to make sure that we return to that period where political parties make a declaration of how much they've received, if it's at least over 100,000 rand. They want that actually lowered, and to also not receive more than 15 million a year from a particular donor. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think that there should be transparency as far as political party funding is concerned? Do you care who donates, how much is donated to different political parties? Joel, hopefully your line is back up and it's working quite well. Welcome back.
Hi. I hope you can hear me now.
I can absolutely hear you. We're speaking about the president and the timing of that signature. It was at the height of the elections. A lot of people were quite suspicious, going, "Oh, here's the fee for all." Now they've got to quickly get as much money as they want across the board, political parties, ahead of the elections.
So it was a legal necessity to sign the Electoral Matters Amendment Act into law before the election. And there's a whole historical reasons why things were rushed and why it got to that point. We aren't saying that there was nefarious intent, right? When we went to court in May, all the state respondents, including the president, were of the opinion that there isn't a gap in the law. They think that the original position was that there are provisions in our law that when one regulation falls away, that before the new one comes in, those old ones sort of remain in place. That originally was the position. In court, our counsel was arguing that what seems to have happened, because there has been precedent for this, is that it was poorly planned and just a misunderstanding of the legislation. Interestingly, all the state respondents in court now are not opposing our application. And that, I'm not speculating as to why they changed their mind, but in May, the court already made a prima facie finding that there was a lacuna in the law. So that's our comment on that.
And I see. And then also, you ultimately what you're saying is that there wasn't a lacuna, there wasn't a gap in the law. That was the confusion that there was, if I'm getting it correctly.
Sorry, okay. So my bad counsel, we went to court because we said there is a gap in the law. Okay. When we went to court, all the state respondents, it was the president, two ministers, and the acting speaker of parliament at the time, they said, by and large, that we were wrong in our reading of the law. That there wasn't a gap, right? But what the court said in May is that on the face of it, it does look like there is a gap. So when this judgment that's been reserved, it will contain is a yes or no to say that there is a gap or there isn't a gap. And if there is, what needs to be done to deal with that.
Okay, that will pave the way forward. I wonder if you can gauge or weigh in on how we fare compared to other countries. I've been saying I've been a little bit obsessed with the US elections. I was there a little bit in some of the swing states a few months ago, and part of what was fascinating to me is that they have a website of pretty much donors. So you can go and search the donors and look at the connections, try and connect the dots of companies, affiliations, and the likes. But I think in my head, the way they work around it is through super PACs.
Exactly.
I just wanted to know, how do you think we fare compared to other countries? And then you can weigh in on how they try and undermine that so-called transparency in the US through the super PACs.
Sure. So, the little I know about that is that in the USA, to give a donation as an individual, the limit is very low that you can provide to a political party, like a few $100 or a few $1,000. But if you do it through a super PAC, it's unlimited. So, these super PACs are raising hundreds of millions of dollars, and it's often whoever has the biggest bank balance and they can ever support it financially the most will be able to support candidates too, and money is a big determining factor in the outcome of those races. We obviously don't have the same amount of money being funding through our politics compared to America, and we, in terms of super PACs, it's not something which I'm so familiar with within our politics. But if you think of when President Ramaphosa came to in 2017.
Yeah, that was pretty much like a super PAC, actually.
Essentially, it does sort of have similarities to that. That's definitely is something which is part of the funding mix, which we do need to understand. You're right.
Is that not something we should be worried about? That because, and I'm glad you mentioned the CR17, campaign and what they were able to do in terms of raising those funds. Yeah. Should that not be something we're weary of? Because I know that there were legal challenges around it. In the end, though, I felt it was an ethical question, and that remains an ethical question, and it can come back in one shape or another, and it's something that we shouldn't actually allow to shape our politics. Should we be worried?
So there are a few things. First of all, that was before we had our party funding legislation in effect. So that would have fallen, so I mean, some of those things that happened then would have been caught under our current legislation. There's also a difference between the funding of internal election campaigns for individual candidates, and then the funding of political parties. So I think that's sort of a bit of a grey area that we need to dig into more.
And what do citizens need to know themselves about funding and what their capabilities are? Because yes, we've just come from an election, but we're in constant flux and we are headed already. You can hear it, that political parties are already preparing for 2026. So we are in a constant flux. So this conversation actually ought to not leave us.
No, this is something which should be a consistent part of our political discussion. We've actually set up a tool. It's called Whose Vote Counts, which you can look at on our website, where it records every single donation that's given to the IEC. So we now have, I think, about 10 quarters worth of information there. And I think there's around 600 million rand that's been donated to parties during this time. So I mean, just to start interrogating some of those sort of things, to start looking at the links between some of the donors to try and understand the patterns, what type of industries, what type, are funding our politics. It's important. We've seen what happens when we don't have an eye on this. So
There's a question here from Jerry in Pretoria, which is very much in line with what you just answered, though, Joel. Says, I feel that political parties must declare every cent they receive so that we will know who has vested interest in those political parties and their affairs. How difficult or easy would it be for every single cent? And would it be unfair even to ask to say every cent you receive, you must declare?
So political parties, even though they only have to disclose amounts over 100,000 rand, they need to record every single cent, right? That's in the law. Their books are audited. So they're doing this anyway, right? Parties always say it's too onerous, that they have to hire a team of accountants and things. We need to know that, what the impact it would have on a political party and our rights to access this information. And at Mother Counts, we are always pushing, we are very rights based. I agree with that sentiment. We also think that in terms of, we shouldn't just know what parties are receiving, we should know how it's spent as well. That's another important part.
That's a very important one, Joel. Just before I let you go very quickly, the question, though, of what happens next. I know that this particular judgment's been reserved. You spoke about another matter that you're being caught for. As far as my vote counts, the work that you're doing, what else should we'll be on the lookout for?
At my vote count, so we're doing a bunch of things. We are launching this week in Joburg. We're doing a new project on civil society electoral reform project. So we're looking at ways that we think we are starting to do research on the electoral system, how it can potentially be changed to deepen accountability. We are continuing with our court cases. We're doing work on coalitions at the moment, trying to understand what laws are best.
All right, Joel, I'm very interested in the work on coalitions. I think your line got cut again. I think your line's starting to act up again. Thank you so much. That's Joel Brechman from My Vote Counts, a senior researcher, speaking about the matter that was in court this week and the fact that they want to see the declarations around the party donations from the act itself being restored. That matter, of course, the judgment has been reserved.